Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. In this video, I wanted to start talking a little bit about some of the nodes that you can find within the Hypershade. So first of all, to find the Hypershade, there are a couple different ways you can open it up. One way is to go to the Windows menu. We have Rendering Editors, and here you have the Hypershade right there. Probably the easiest way, though, is up here. You have this little blue circular button that looks like a pool ball. Click on this, and this will open the Hypershade. So this is your typical Hypershade. But one thing I do want to do, let me close it actually. So here in my perspective view, we can go to the Panels menu, Panel, and we can open the Hypershade here. Click on Hypershade, and my perspective panel itself will change to be the Hypershade. So instead of the Hypershade being a separate window that floats around on top of your scene itself can become the Hypershade, which is kind of cool. So here you can see the typical Hypershade. I'm going to actually close the channel box for now. So I have here the different elements of the Hypershade that we talked about and that initial overview of the Hypershade. And what I wanted to talk about today specifically is a layered texture. We've talked about textures before in other videos, but a texture is essentially an image that you apply to a material to make it look like something. For example, a brick image applied to the color of a material makes that material look like brick, and you apply that material to a wall object that you've made, and now your wall looks like it's a brick wall. So let me demonstrate that really quickly. I'm just going to go over here in the Create window, and I'm going to create a Lambert material. The Lambert material is a typical material that Maya uses quite often. It's a very matte material. I'm going to apply a color texture to this material. Over here in the property editor of the Hypershade, we have the color attribute. I'm going to click on the checker button here next to it to create a new render node. So we have the create render node window open. And I'm going to apply an image of brick to this material. So in order to do that, I have to use a file that I've prepared outside of Maya, right? So all these different nodes that you see here, the vast majority of them are nodes that Maya has come with. However, the file node here allows me to choose a file from outside of Maya to apply. So I'm going to click on File, and you see here in my work area how this file node has attached itself to my material, and you see the out color of the file is attached to the color input of the Lambert. So I'm throwing lots of terms at you at once, but all these little dots on the left side of all of these different nodes are inputs. Things that are coming in come in on the left side of each node. Things that are going out of it, like the color coming out of the file, comes out on the right side and goes in to the material on the left side. And all these little dots represent inputs that can accept information. All these little dots on the right side represent information going out. I'm going to click on this file node now, and here I have the file properties displayed. I can browse with this little folder button to an image on my computer to use as the texture. So I'll do that now. So here we have an image of brick. If I click open, you can see here that black box now shows a picture of the brick. You can see here in my material viewer, we now see brick on the material. That file name has been mapped here within the image name attribute of the file. Okay, so we have our Lambert material with a brick texture applied to the color. So I'm going to actually press the space bar to switch back to my perspective view, and let's create a cube. I'm just going to shape it real quick to be as if it is a kind of a wall shape. I'm going to apply that material. Let me press space bar again and go back to my Hypershade. I can just left click the Lambert 2 name, and I can actually rename it. So let's say I want to rename this Lambert 2 to be brick material and hit enter. So now instead of it being just called Lambert 2, now it's called brick material. Let me press space bar again now. I can select my wall, hold down the right mouse button, scroll down to assign existing material, and here in my list we have Lambert 1, which is just the typical gray material that everything comes with, or brick material. If I select brick material, it applies the brick material to my cube. However, I don't really see it yet because I haven't made textures visible in my scene. By default, your scene is typically in a shaded view and not a textured view, right? So the shortcut keys for all these different kinds of views are 4 for wireframe. A wireframe view is simply just showing the lines, not seeing any kind of surface. 5 for shaded view, that's what we started out in. And then 6 for textured view. So here you can see those bricks applied to my cube. Right now they're really huge, but that's not really a part of this tutorial, just kind of showing applying that texture to the brick. And press spacebar again to go back to Hypershade. That's all well and good, but let's say I want to apply a different texture to the brick. So I used a file node before to connect to the brick material. So over here on the left side, I can make another file node. So let's go to 2D textures, click on that, and you can see here, file. If I left click this, a new file node gets created. Using this second file node, I'm actually going to rename this first one to be brick. I call it brick image. However, when I hit enter, it shows me the name of the file, but I guess that works too. So with this second file, I'm going to browse to a different texture. So here I have an image of a wooden crate, also found at cgtextures.com. I'm going to use that. Hit open. So you can see here with file 2, the wooden crate has been applied. I'm going to actually name it right here to be wood crate. So with the wood crate texture here, I'm going to just click and drag on the out color. I'm going to apply this to the color of my brick material, in addition to the bricks, right? So I want to be bricks and wood. Is that possible? Let's see. The output out color of this node to the input color of the brick material, and let go. And you can see as soon as I did that, it actually detached the brick texture and attached the wood crate texture instead. So you can't have multiple textures applied at once. Hit the space bar. You can see here, this is my giant wood crate image instead of the brick. Press space bar to go back. So you can't have multiple things coming into the same input at the same time. However, there is such a thing as a layered texture. So that's what this video is actually about. So I lost the setup. So layered textures. Let's look for layered textures. Over here in the create window, we can go to the other textures category. We have 2D textures, 3D textures, environment textures, and then other textures. And the only other texture there is a layered texture. I'm going to left click it, and it creates a layered texture node like this. So I'm going to detach the wood crate from my material right now. I can just select this arrow and hit delete. It actually deletes that arrow and detaches it from the material. I'll go back to the material. You see here it's just that gray color again. So I have both of my textures over here, and then I have this layered texture in between. I can just rearrange these nodes around and kind of get a better sense of things. We can also rescale some of this stuff if we want more space. So over here in the property editor, we can see the layered texture properties or attributes. So the first thing to look at is the layered texture attributes. We have this folder we can close and open, but with inside here we have this red lined area with this green box with this little X button below it. So this is essentially, if you're familiar at all with Photoshop, and actually I can switch to Photoshop right now. So here we are in Photoshop. So if you're familiar with Photoshop at all, Photoshop uses layers. So I click down here, I can create a new layer, and I could, for example, just kind of draw something on there. I can click and make a new layer on top of that, change the color of this brush, make it red. I can draw something on top of that. So you can see, let me zoom in actually, you can see how those red strokes are on top of the black strokes, right? I can rearrange these layers though, so that the black strokes are now on top of the red strokes. I can just rearrange these layers that are on top of each other in a stack order. So layer 1, for example, is below layer 2. They're stacked on top of each other like that, okay? So that concept is also used in a layered texture. Let's go back to Maya. So here we have our layered texture. So here this green box is essentially layer 1. You can refer to that using like a Photoshop term. If I click in this layered texture attribute area, you see I make another quote-unquote layer. Okay, you see how that works? I can click again and just keep making layers. And all these green boxes can have these different textures applied to them. So let me select the layer texture again. I'm actually going to click the little X below these to delete those layers. So we're back to having one layer. So for the color of this layer, we can apply a texture. For example, this brick texture can be applied to layer 1. One really quick, easy way to do that is to middle mouse click. And remember, I'm middle mouse clicking and not left mouse clicking. Middle mouse click on this texture and just drag it all the way over here onto the color right here. See how the color kind of gets this white dashed box around it? Once I have it over the color attribute right here, I can let go. And immediately you see, instead of that green box now we have a blue box. This blue box indicates the layer actually has an image assigned to it. So now our layer has been assigned with this brick texture. I'm actually going to click on the out color of the layered texture now into the color of my brick material. If I press the space bar now and go back, you can see immediately that brick has been applied to my wall. So the brick texture, the color of the brick, out color, is passing from the output of the texture into the layered texture being assigned to layer 1 here, if you want to call it that, and then going out from there to the material. So all this information is passing through these lines, and make sure you pay attention to the direction these arrows are pointing. So out color from here into here, out color from here into here. Okay? So now let's make another layer. So I'm going to left click in here to create a new layer. And if I middle mouse click and drag this cargo, wooden cargo crate image onto color, right now, however, that would be a mistake. But you can see here, my first brick layer is selected, and this color attribute has this little black arrow next to it. This color has been applied with this brick texture right now. So if I were to drag another texture on top of this color attribute right now, it will reassign it to the wood crate, and it will no longer have the brick on it anymore. So what I actually need to do is to select the layer I want, which is this green layer. So now I have the green layer, the empty green layer selected. Middle mouse click the wooden cargo crate onto that one's color now, and let go. So now that second one has been applied with the crate, and you see these two lines now going into here. And this is the inputs here. If I expand this with clicking this little plus button, you can see my input 0 and input 1. One thing to know about Maya is that whenever it lists anything, like in a listed order, like an array, it always starts with number 0. So the first entry is 0 all the time. The second entry is 1, the third entry is 2, and so on. So that can be a little confusing if you're not ready for it. But input 0 is the first layer, input 1 is the second layer, and so on. If I were to expand these out, you can see the out color is going into the color attribute of input 0. That's what this is right here. So I can collapse this again to go back to like this. So the color out color of these two things, these two textures are going into the layer texture here, and then now they're coming out as a single output. Instead of having multiple outputs from multiple textures, they're all coming out as a single output that we can apply to the color of the brick. So let me go back to the wall now. But nothing's changed. You don't really see anything. And let me explain why that is. Let's go back to the Hypershade and click on my layered texture here. So I have my two layers, right? You can see here my material viewer is showing me just brick. But I created a second layer and I applied wood to it, this wood crate image. However, just like in Photoshop, these are layers that are on top of each other. Okay? So this first layer, the brick, is on top of the second layer, the wood crate. So it's covering the wood crate. It's covering it up completely. You can't see it at all because the wood crate is the second layer. If I want to, I can reorder these layers. If I middle mouse click, again, middle mouse click on the brick layer and drag it to the right, you can see this little yellow box up here, let go. And now I've reordered them. So now the wood layer is on top of the brick layer. You can see here in my material viewer. And if we press the spacebar, we can see that happen here as well. I can do that again to reorder them back the way they were. However, that doesn't show me both textures. If I want both textures to be visible, that's not helping me. So, what do we need to do? Well, just like in Photoshop, there are things called masks. Okay, let's go back to Photoshop real quick. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and I have this brick image in layer 2, which is on top of the wood crate image in layer 1. So you see if I hide the brick layer, I can see the wood crate layer beneath it. So that's essentially exactly what's happening in Maya right now. We have our brick layer covering our wood crate layer in our layer texture node. So just like in Photoshop, we can apply a mask. If I click down here in Photoshop, this kind of TV looking icon, this is the create mask button, and if I click it, you see this white box appear next to the brick texture, and if I paint in this white box area, you see I can switch between these two to paint in. If I paint in this one a black color, you can see what happens is it masks out the brick area that I'm painting in and shows the wood area, the wood texture beneath it. So you can see here that black area that I just painted is like a mask, like a window through layer 2 to see layer 1 beneath it. Okay, does that make sense? You can paint in these masks, these windows through layers to see the one beneath it. So we can do the same thing in Maya. Let's go back there. So if you look again in our layered texture here, we have our brick layer and our wood layer. Both layers have this thing called an alpha. This alpha essentially is like a mask or a layer transparency slider. It could also be thought of that. If I were to slide the alpha of the brick layer down to 0, for example, you can see that it hides the brick layer completely and we can see the wood beneath it. So this is like a transparency. So I can, for example, lower this to like 0.5. And now we can see there's a blend happening. So we've lowered the transparency or the alpha of the brick image to 50%, 0.5. And now that brick image has increased in transparency 50%, and we can see the wood beneath it. And here you can kind of see that happening. So now we're getting that kind of layered result. You can see those wood grains and such and the brick at the same time. Here we are back in the Hypershade. So that's all well and good. We can kind of sort of blend between brick, but what if we don't really want to do that? What if we want to do like a mask like we did in Photoshop, where we have sections or portions of the texture different than others that we can see through? So the alpha also has a checkerboard button next to it where we can apply a texture, apply an image to the alpha of the brick. Let's do that. We'll click this little button and we can apply some sort of image to the alpha to control it. Now an alpha is a grayscale attribute. So we're going to apply an image that is grayscale or black and white. And what happens is the values from 0 to 1, let me actually close this real quick before we do it. So alpha goes from 0 to 1, right? Where 1, we can see the brick, and at 0, we can't. So what we want to have is an image where we have black or 0 values, where we don't see the brick, like this, and also areas of white or 1, values of 1, where we do see the brick. And so a black and white image. So I'm going to go to this button again, and let's use the Maya's default checkerboard texture. It's a black and white checkerboard. If I click this, you can immediately see what happens here. So here I have this checker image, and we can expand this out. Let's actually reorder this a little bit just so we can kind of see what's going on. Keep these two things together. So the checker texture here, it's out alpha, not out color, but out alpha is going in here. We can expand this input. It's going to the alpha of the input. We can expand this back in. So with a checkerboard alpha, black and white checker applied to the alpha of the brick, now we're getting this pattern. You can see there's a brick pattern. Brick is a checkered brick and wood. Press the spacebar to go back to here. You can see that happening here. We're getting that alpha effect where wherever that alpha was black, we're seeing the wood. Wherever the alpha was white, we're seeing the brick. So in addition to being able to mask these layers with alphas, we also have blend modes. Let's go back to Photoshop again. Photoshop's a very good representative of what the layered texture is able to do. So with this brick layer selected, here we have the blending modes we can choose from. Right now I have normal selected, so it's a normal blending mode. It's nothing really fancy happening. I can choose all these other options here. For example, multiply. So with multiply chosen, the values of the brick are being multiplied over the wood, getting this kind of result. We can also choose, for example, overlay, which kind of gives this brightening effect. We can also choose, for example, color dodge. So all these different blend modes do different things to the image based on what's below it. Let's go back to Maya now. And here with the brick layer selected, I have a blend mode. Right now it's set to over. There are all these other options we can choose from. Some of them are very similar to the ones you see in Photoshop. For example, multiply. You can see with that multiply turned on, what we get here. Let's actually press the space bar to go back to our views. So we get this multiplying effect, and we still have the checker effect as well. So we have alpha being applied, as well as a blend mode change to make the brick areas multiply over the wood areas. Again, so you can have lots of options here for how your textures blend together. So this is multiply. There's difference, which is interesting. It's kind of getting this kind of effect. Can apply a saturation. A little subtle there. We have additive, which is kind of like a brightening effect. So there's lots of different things you can do when it comes to blend modes, as well as the alpha mask you can apply. And you can have more than just 2 layers here. You can have several layers all working together, blending together differently to create an overall effect. One thing to note about having no blend mode at all is it overwrites the alpha mask that we have applied, and it's just showing brick now. So all that alpha no longer has any effect when blend mode is set to none. So hopefully that explains a little bit of how the layered texture works in general. We have the color, the alpha, and the blend mode for all the different layers here in this red-lined area. And the layer on the far left is on top of the layer next to it to the right, and so on down the list. So another thing you can do is you can hide layers. If you had multiple layers here, and you wanted to hide one, similar how you can do in Photoshop. Let's go back there real quick. In Photoshop layers, I have these little eyeball buttons. We can click on the eye to hide a layer like this. Same kind of deal in Maya. We can say layer is visible, turn that off, and now that layer is just black because it's not visible. There's nothing beneath it. Turn it back on. Select this layer, say layer is visible. Nope, just see the wood now. Layer is visible. So this is just one way that you can take multiple textures and apply them all to the same color attribute of a material. Layered textures are pretty cool. They're very useful, especially when you have things you need to layer on top of each other. They're especially useful for getting this kind of effect without having to resort to some other complicated way of doing it with multiple materials being applied to different faces and so on. You can use a layered texture to get a very cool result. I hope this video was helpful and you enjoyed it, learning about layered textures and learning about another way of using the Hypershade in Maya. So here with the layered texture node, we kind of have a little bit of Photoshop built into Maya itself. Thanks again for watching, guys. If you have any questions or comments, or if I missed something, let me know. Otherwise, I do appreciate all your support, and I'll talk to you later.